who's the prophet who never really got it? Or who's the prophet who was swallowed by the big fish? You probably know that's Jonah, because you've probably seen it in a kid's Bible or heard about it in Sunday school or your kids' classes at church. But did you know we don't always hear the whole story? We all know Jonah was told by God to go to Nineveh, and Jonah said no, and he ran away from God. And he got on a ship, and so God sent a storm that threatened to break up the ship. And it was so bad, the sailors were like throwing everything off the ship to just try to save themselves. And the storm got so bad, Jonah finally said, "Throw me overboard." Now, Jonah wasn't saying this to try to save the sailors. Jonah was saying, "Throw me overboard," because he would rather die than obey God. And what I love what God does is God goes, "Oh no, Jonah, you're not about to die." And he sends fish, and the fish swallows Jonah, and Jonah's inside that fish for 3 days and 3 nights. And Jonah prays a prayer. Now, I think God gives us a little insight into Jonah's prayer if it was sincere and genuine by the way the fish gets rid of Jonah. Go look at the end of chapter 2 to see what that fish does. I think that gives us some insight into Jonah's prayer and how God felt about it. But Jonah finally decides, okay, I'm going to go to Nineveh. I can't even die to get away from God. So he goes to Nineveh and gives the shortest message he can and then doesn't do anything else. But the people listen. In fact, the king, from the greatest, the king, all the way to the least, they repent. And the king asks, who knows? He's asking, who can help us know what we need to do? And Jonah keeps his mouth shut. In fact, Jonah goes outside of the city and has a temper tantrum. And this is the part of the story we don't often hear. In chapter 4, Jonah's throwing a complete temper tantrum. And he's yelling at God and he's telling God, I told you this way back when I was home. This is why I didn't want to go. I knew you'd be compassionate and forgive them. Like it's a bad thing that God shows compassion and kindness and forgiveness. And Jonah walks away from God. So God asks Jonah a few questions, and Jonah finally says, I'd rather die. Jonah hated those people so much. He would rather die than allow God to show compassion and kindness on them. And so that leaves us with a bigger question in the story of Jonah. Jonah hated them so much, he was willing to die so they couldn't be forgiven. And the book of Jonah doesn't end. It doesn't end with Jonah repenting. It doesn't end with Jonah saying he was sorry or Jonah saying, I shouldn't hate these people. Because it leaves us then with, how do I feel about people? Is there anyone I would rather die? I would rather that I die than they get forgiveness from God? That's a scary thought. I need, even on my enemies, the Assyrians who Jonah was sent to were evil people. But God was willing to give them a chance to repent. So we have 2 things we can learn from the book of Jonah. 1, those evil Assyrians, those people from Nineveh were terrible. They did terrible things, but they changed. They repented. They turned from their evil ways, and God was willing to show them compassion. So if God is willing to show forgiveness and compassion and relent from the destruction he's sending to an evil people like the Assyrians, what's he going to do for you? He's willing to show you that same kind of forgiveness and grace and compassion. But the other question we're left with then is, don't be like Jonah. Don't hate someone so much you want God to send destruction on them. Our jobs as priests for the king, as representatives of the king, is to bring that message that God does have compassion. He's slow to anger and abounding in love. So as you go about today, don't forget those 2 lessons, and I'll see you next time.